Good evening, members of council, ladies and gentlemen, staff. I see that we have quorum, and I call this regular meeting of committee for October 1st to order. It's been moved by Councillor King that the agenda for the October 1st, 2018 regular meeting of committee be adopted as circulated. Are there any amendments to the agenda? There being none, I call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Next is disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Do any members have any conflicts of interest they need to note?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I have one item, and it's in relation to the unopened road allowance, West Haight Street, north of Foss Road, 411. A family member owns property in the vicinity. So I would ask the deputy to take the chair at that point. We are now going to move to that item, so I would ask the deputy mayor to take over that portion of the meeting, if you'll excuse me.
Is it right here? Yeah. Thank you, colleagues. Moved by Councillor Lane. Item 4.1.1, an information report, the unopened road allowance west of Hayes Street and north of Foss Road, and that committee receives the report, unopened road allowance west of Hayes Street and north of Foss Road for information. Discussion, if any?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a long discussion with the owner of the property who has an interest in this, and he is farming part of it, and he's also farming another part on the other side of unopened road allowance, and this is why he is interested if he could purchase it. I understand fully the comprehensive report given to us by planning and the fact that if in fact we need to extend the urban boundary, that is going to be the only place really that we could go. But in the interim, he can be farming this area. There's no problem if he does farm that particular portion, which is the unopened road allowance, and take the crops off.
Madam Director?
Yes, Mr. Chair, through you, that is correct. We do allow him to farm on our unopened road allowance. He currently is, and that's not an issue for us. However, if and when we ever need to utilize the unopened road allowance, then we would require to do so, and he would no longer be able to farm.
Okay. And the only reason that if he was to purchase the area on the other side, he could not combine it with his others because the unopened road allowance creates a natural severance, a natural boundary?
That's correct, and certainly when staff did meet with Mr. Fraser back in, I guess in the spring, I mean, he's wanting to acquire this one piece of property and merge it in title with this other farm property, and the only way he could do that is if he had a piece of this unopened road allowance. But it does present some long-term challenges for the municipality, and so at this point in time, staff are not in a position to recommend closing the unopened road allowance.
Thank you. And you say long-term, so that I'm suggesting this is going to be a ways down the way.
Yes, and
Okay.
so in the interim, he will be allowed to farm.
Okay, and that brings another question that if in fact the urban boundary does expand to the south part or south of Foss Road where the cannabis operation is, there is an unopened road allowance adjacent to that. Will that also be something that could be looked at in order to expand the urban boundary, or that's hard to tell?
Well, that's hard to tell, and that would be something that we would look at the time we go and do a comprehensive review of where the appropriate boundary should expand to, how far, and what lands would be included. That isn't anything that we could say with confidence right now how far that boundary expansion would go.
Thank you, and through you again, Mr. Chair. So in the interim, the cannabis operation, if they are storing some building materials and all that on there, that is just about the same use as the Mr. Fraser doing the farming?
Yes, they're not allowed to have any buildings or structures within the road allowance.
But that answers questions that were posed to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Director. Other questions? Councillor Lane?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the director. Is there any time frame for how long this person can use this land, i.e. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, without maybe end up taking possession of it or not?
Mr. Chair, through you, we don't have any time frame. Again, part of the long-term planning with respect to our urban boundaries and potential expansions would be something that we would probably be looking at to consider within somewhere between the 5 to 10 year time frame, depending on how fast we build out our current boundaries. And so that process is a very complicated process, and it needs to be coordinated with the region and the overall growth across the region. And again, over a long term, should there ever be a need to expand Pelham's urban boundary around the Font Hill community, this is the only area that isn't impacted by the Niagara Escarpment Plan or the Greenbelt Plan area boundary, and so it would be a logical place to make or to consider an urban boundary expansion.
Thank you, Madam Director. Councillor Lane, that's it. Other discussion? Ready to call the question? All in favor? That is carried. Want to tell the mayor that he can come back?
Yeah, you're doing a fine job.
Can I borrow your- I guess you know that it was passed. Don't you? Oh, there it is. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much to the Deputy Mayor. We'll now move on to the next item, which has been moved by Councillor King. The Committee of the Whole received the Community Planning and Development Report, September 2018, for information. Councillor Kersey, you want to start with your question?
Sure, Mr. Mayor, and yeah, I'll start with that. I had a number of other questions, but so, Madam Director, at the risk of being repetitive, I was wondering if you could comment on why we're taking a slightly different tack with dealing with the short-term rental property issue as opposed to the cannabis issue. In one, we're initiating studies on both issues. One, we're putting in place an interim control bylaw. The other, we're not taking any interim measures. And we know there's going to be a timeline affixed to that. So how will that impact on businesses that might start during that interim study period, when we don't have that interim control bylaw and we're doing our studies? So if you could comment on that for clarity.
Just for clarity, what businesses, additional vacation rental properties?
Yes,
Is that what
that's
you mean?
right.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So, council has asked staff to undertake a review of our land use planning policies and regulations with respect to vacation rental, and also to look at a licensing bylaw to regulate and license interim control bylaws. Licensing bylaws are passed under the Municipal Act, and as I indicated earlier, they do not have, or they are not subject to grandfathering provisions, unlike uses in a zoning bylaw may be. Our current zoning bylaw does not define what a short-term rental is. It's there's no regulations for it. We have definitions for hotels, and we have definitions for boarding houses, but those are not what a short-term rental are in a residential setting or environment. And so when we put in new policies and regulations in our zoning bylaw with respect to short-term rentals, we will identify where these uses may be permitted and where they may not be permitted. And if, for example, we say that they're not going to be allowed in the R1 zone, if they are operated as a short-term rental that is not owner-occupied. There's been some conversation and discussion about that as, for example. And so if that were the case, any ones that exist today in the license, if the licensing bylaw stipulates that they need to be appropriately zoned in order to get a license, then they would need to either go through a zoning bylaw amendment to permit it, or it needs to have been recognized under the new zoning. And then the licensing bylaw will say something to the effect that you need to be properly zoned or comply to the zoning bylaw. So anybody then who wants to apply for a license needs to comply, and that's how you get around the grandfathering in zoning, because grandfathering does not apply to licensing.
Right, interesting.
So that's a mechanism that would be available. And so uses that may be operating now may not be able to legally operate in the future, depending on what we put into our licensing bylaw. Okay?
Just as a follow-up.
Please,
if I
yeah,
may.
it's very interesting.
So thank you for that, Madam Director. It's kind of a nuance, but will accomplish the same in the long run. If we get to the point where we do bring forward a licensing bylaw, what is the mechanism for appeal of that licensing bylaw, should somebody? Would it be through the LPAT, or would it go to the OMB, or we don't know that at this point?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I believe any appeals to licensing are actually through the courts. It's not through LPAT. It would be through the courts.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Very, very interesting. Anyone else on that issue? Okay, if colleagues are okay, Councillor Kersey, you indicated you had another couple items.
Just a couple of very quick questions, Mr. Mayor. Madam Director, comprehensive zoning bylaw, it appears that you have now a draft copy from the consultants. Do we have timelines now attached to circulating to the commenting agencies and taking it out one step further when we're going to involve the public in the process and all that? Could you outline that for us, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you, I certainly hope to get this thing out and circulated to the agencies within the next week. It's certainly is long overdue. I would anticipate that we would start scheduling open houses and so forth, probably in the new year. Just give the agencies a time to review and have some input, and let's get some preliminary feedback from them, and then go to the public, and then be able to wrap this up in the first quarter of next year.
That's great news.
Okay, anyone else on zoning? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Madam Director, again, it's with respect to timelines, and I'm specifically looking at Baxter Hall. And I'm wondering if you could give us an update on this important development and what you foresee as the timelines going forward.
Yes.
Just a second, Councillor Papp.
If you're going to respond, I have to.
Oh, I'm sorry,
I have to
Councillor.
declare a conflict, thanks.
The conflict is.
My son works for the company.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Ms. Weens.
Mr. Mayor, through you, we did meet with the applicant and their consultants last week on Thursday afternoon. There are some changes being made to the site plan and the site servicing plan. They are not significant changes, so we anticipate that we will have the receipt of those revised drawings. They were promised to us today. I don't believe they did come today, but if we get them by tomorrow, we will be endeavoring to get a report for the October 15th agenda on this matter. We need to have a draft of the report completed by the end of this week so that I can review it the first of next week, and then it gets approved by the CAO by Wednesday next week. So if everything falls into place, that's our latest schedule with respect to Baxter Hall.
Okay,
Thank you for
thank
the
you.
update.
Anyone else to Baxter? Councillor Ribbiak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a yellow highlight all over this thing, so I thank Councillor Kirsty for asking those questions. We are certainly anticipating, I hope, the report for the October 16th meeting. Thank you. 15th.
15th.
My apologies.
All right, thank you.
I don't want to be late.
I think, what I'm hearing in that end of town, there's a lot of anticipation about this particular development because it is
It's big.
it's a large development, but it's also for seniors predominantly, and many folks wanted to age in place, and, so it's an important development for that part of our town, and just as council is working on another couple of important developments in a different part of town, so I look forward to receiving information about that and duly considering it. So I look forward to that, to our next, would that come to council, Ms. Weems, or would that come to committee?
I think we will probably make it a direct report to council.
Okay, thank you for the information, thank you. Unless there's anything else on Baxter, if we can ask Councillor Papp to come back in, thank you. And while the councillor is coming back in, does anyone have any other questions regarding, or comments regarding the Community Planning and Development Monthly Report? Thank you, Councillor Papp.
Thank you.
Do you happen to have any other items on the, that you'd like to ask or raise in the Planning and Development Report, or shall I? Okay, thank you.
I'm good, Mr.
Then I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Papp. The Committee of the Whole received the Corporate Services Report for September 2018 for information.
Nothing here. Nothing here.
Comments, questions? Madam Treasurer, we do an annual audit, right?
Yes.
Oh, okay, because I was reading somewhere that someone said that we don't do an annual audit, and they were promising and proposing that the town would have an annual audit, so,
For you, Mr. Mayor, it's a requirement from the municipal act that we do.
okay, thank you for that clarity, I appreciate that. I'm going to call the question unless there's, I'm sorry, Councilor Durling.
Yeah, this, Mr. Mayor, through you, there have been some questions regarding the type of advertising that can be on the boards or on the ice in the arenas because of conflicts of ownership and types of business and so on. Where can parties go to achieve any resolution if they have a problem with some of that? And just how clearly defined is the just, we got to look it up here, the arena advertising rights agreement.
Okay.
The successful bidder is out very busily selling stuff, but apparently has been some conflict as to you can't put this in there because there's another company that is, and different things have happened, so I just wonder if there's clarification involved.
Ms. Quinlan, can you help the council?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Mayor, what we have is, through some of the pledge agreements that we have, there are some specific requirements, what some advertising can and cannot happen because of those pledge agreements. So we are, we have, I guess the question is, where can you go to that? So we have a specific list, so we have that list of what can and cannot go on the advertising based on the pledge agreements that have been signed.
Okay, and
So if anybody has a question, they can come to me.
the successful bidder definitely has this in his agreement, and
Yes.
okay, so it's black and white. There's no gray, as far as that's concerned, or
Yeah.
okay. Okay, that's good, and just, people should be made aware of that, because there have been some questions, at least I'm understanding there have been some questions about advertising rates. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else to the report? There being none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Now we have our fire and bylaw services. It's moved by Councillor Durley that we receive it for information, and that's the report from September 2018. Questions or comments? Chief, is there a revised timeline regarding the radios? You indicated that it was supposed, like, we budgeted for it, et cetera, and it was supposed to start in September. It's just been postponed, I guess. There's no, is there a timeline for that?
Without getting into too much detail, we run into a couple little glitches, and it quite possibly might not happen until the new year now.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Working on it between.
Right. And that's, just for clarity, is that, that's sort of a regional project, isn't it? Is it not, across the region?
Mr. Mayor, it originated, the Niagara Regional Police started the project.
Right.
Then St. Catharines and Niagara Falls Dispatch Centers, because they had to upgrade their equipment because it was end of life. And then as our equipment becomes end of life, which ours and West Lincoln's are right now, or
Okay.
our equipment that we're
Getting
getting, we have
close,
to
yeah.
replace it. And then the other municipalities should follow in suit in the next, year or so, kind of follow.
Okay. Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you very much. Anyone else to any of the items in the chief's report? Councillor Lane?
Just, thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment, 12 new firefighters. I think that is, if I'm reading this right, to start in November.
Chief?
Through Mr. Mayor, we ran a recruit class.
Yes, sir.
And we just finally selected those 12. And those are to replace some retirees, this month we've lost 3 members to full-time fire departments in the region, unfortunately, one of them being our fire prevention officer. So we've lost people, so we're just basically filling in. And we're gonna be upstaffing Station 1 sometime in 19 when we get back up to the numbers, so.
It is good news, and we appreciate those coming forward and wanting to essentially volunteer for the community and keep it safe. So thank you to those new recruits. Councillor Durley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just through you, I'd like to make a comment that just shows how great our training program is. If our guys trained in our department that can get jobs in full-time in larger municipalities, full-time jobs, that shows that our staff is fully trained, well-trained, and credit to the training department and to the fire department as a whole, because we're certainly well-protected, and we really appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor. Any others? There being none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Kersey that Committee of the Whole receive the Public Works September 2018 report for information. Thank you, Councillor Ribiak. I believe if there's questions, the CAO was taking those. Unfortunately, he's ill today, so I think Ms. Quinlan, I don't know if you can answer these, or we can take them and post them and get the answers at our next meeting. Go ahead.
Thank you, and you're right. I should have noted that we're absent the CAO who would have answered these. So perhaps you can make note of these questions and respond to them in time. There's a note with regard to Sulphur Springs rehabilitation. Final report anticipated for September. We're into October. Is there a timeline? That's a question that can be taken to the CAO.
Thank you. I noticed that as well. Go ahead.
The second area, and again, the answer to this one I think is really important to me. There's a sentence that says rural roadside mowing has begun. The cut is expected to take 2 to 3 weeks and is being closely monitored by the supervisor of roads. So my question, I guess, will have to do with, so what's expected to happen within those 2 to 3 weeks? Is that all the roadside ditches throughout the entire municipality? To what extent, what standard, who's doing it, those kinds of questions. I know we had those issues before. And because our next meeting isn't for at least the next 2 weeks, I'm just wondering whether someone might ask the CAO to talk to Public Works staff and make sure this is being looked at as closely as it can be. This has been a real issue this year, and I'm hopefully this last cut at it will help. And finally,
Ms. Quinlan, can you assure the counselor that we'll get those answers?
Yes, we will.
Okay?
thank you. And the last question has to do with respect to water. I noted in a previous report, I think it was from Services, that the amount of water used this summer was about 50% more than usual. And I was going to ask what impact, if any, there is on our systems with regard, or as a result of that increase in water, and if that's going to be a constant, because some people say the climate is changing, and it may turn out to be a constant, a more regular experience, what that might mean in terms of planning for that in our infrastructure in the future. And again, that's a question I guess that we can hold till next
Okay,
meeting.
Thank you.
Being longer range.
we'll see if we can get those answers either at council or in a written form as an addendum to this report. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Kersey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two things I wanted to ask about, if they could be noted. Last CAL meeting, I brought up the issue of the dehumidifiers and the issues we were having at the MCC and what was being done with respect to the repairs and the warranty and all of that sort of thing. And the CAO was going to look into it, so I would like to have an update on that. I think those are very important, and
Okay, I don't think we have anybody to answer
Oh,
that
we don't have
question
anybody.
tonight, so
no.
that cannot be noted.
And the other thing that I was hoping to get some information on, the little study that we did on Lookout Street with the pseudo roundabouts seemed to have a rather interesting, if not impressive, effect on the speeds. And yet, out of that, there doesn't appear to be any recommendation or what the next steps are with respect to the information that we've accrued. So it would be interesting to have a comment on that, perhaps at our next council meeting, Mr. Mayor. That would be interesting to understand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the comment here is that, I had a question about that. It says, in 2019, Public Works Department would like to install temporary speed cushions on Hurricane and Lookout Street in mid-block locations. Lots of comments from that area about speeding.
Right.
And on Hay Street North as well. So, we'll get an update on that. What's the plan? What do you mean? What are these speed cushions? You know, if it appeared that they did calm the traffic significantly, but were there other mitigating factors and why they're not recommending that? I know some folks were concerned about turning into the development, so.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Durley. and then
Thank you, Mr.
Councillor
Mayor.
King.
Speaking of comments, on Welland Avenue continues to be an area where comments are coming in. The surface of the road between Pelham Street and Hay Street has been on the radar for quite a while. It's been reported for a couple of months at least, and in walking around knocking on doors, I'm getting more and more concerns about that. Just wondering if although the surface of the road the way it is probably is a traffic calming device, however, they're looking at, they would like to have
Unintentional.
something that's a little more safe and a little more smooth in that area, because actually the surface of that road is not in very good shape. So hopefully that is part of the road rehabilitation, which is to be scheduled for the fall, which is now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think the clerk has noted that. Councillor King?
Thank you. I'm not looking for an answer, obviously, tonight, but there's a point in this report relating to spring traffic data collection program. I would like an explanation on what that is, because we're heading into winter now, and it looks as though there's data that's been compiled and a report would be coming forward, but I don't see any of that information there. So saying that, I realize that Public Works has a staff shortage, unfortunate. But I'm wondering if at the next meeting, we could have perhaps the manager of Public Works attend so that we can have some of these questions addressed.
Okay. Thank you. We'll get that. Thank you. Any others? I have a couple of things, if I might, and colleagues have raised some of them. My recollection is that at Summersides and Station in Pelham Town Square, that we actually approved a four-way stop in lieu of a traffic circle, which is to be done in the future. It's only a two-way stop at this point, so I just wondered if we can get an update. I believe we approved that. I could be wrong, but I thought we approved that. A couple of other things here. Very pleased to see that the Hay Street, the former arena, the plant has been decommissioned. There's some pictures there about what it looks like, and certainly needed to be decommissioned. And very pleased that another group is using that equipment. So that's the Curling Club in Welland has asked for, and we've been able to donate that equipment to them. It's kind of they have similar vintage equipment, and this would be used for for them should they need to fix their equipment. So very pleased that we're able to do that with that old and aged equipment. There's also comment in the report, and the final thing is that talking about usage in the Meridian Community Center, especially as it relates to the arenas, and it talks about how figure skating is seeing an increase and others are seeing an increase, etc. And I think it would be important for council to get an update on the usage and how whether we're meeting those targets. I think, I know we are. Every time I'm kind of anecdotally, I can imagine that we are, because every time I'm there, both rinks are full steam and et cetera. But I think it would be interesting to have an update of what was kind of promised and where we're at in reality. And I believe, again, I think it's the numbers are there. So it'd be interesting to get those numbers for the community. Those are my items, and unless there's any others, we will approve this with direction to get answers at our next meeting on those items. Hopefully have appropriate staff here as well. Going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Kersey. The Committee of the Whole received the Recreation, Culture and Wellness Report for September for information. That director isn't here either. Questions from council or comments? Councillor Kersey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, we probably won't get an answer unless the Director of Corporate Services might be up on this. With respect to the Abbott and Marlene Stewart Street park at the end of that street that we've gone out with an RFP, has that RFP closed, and what are the plan? If so, what are the awarding timelines, and as far as public engagement for design, are you able to answer that?
Through you,
Thank you,
Mr.
Ms.
Mayor,
Quinlan.
this is the naturalization parks?
Yes.
Yes, so it has gone out for tender, and the tender has just closed, so they're in the process of reviewing the tenders that have been received. So that's where we are right now.
So are you foreseeing then public engagement coming sometime in October, mid-October-ish?
I think that was the plan, what
Okay.
what the plan was.
Thank you.
Yes, lots of questions about that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hopefully this fall we'll get the public engagement.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you. Anyone else on that topic? Any other topics? Actually, just for committee's awareness, had a request from one of the greenhouses that's employing a large number of people that maybe they can make use of the transit system a little bit more, and so I know the director is working with them on that. So just for your information, for Can Trust is interested in maybe using that. They have some parking issues, and perhaps they can have use of the bus.
Have no parking up there.
They have no parking issues, they have no parking.
So I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. Moved by Councilor Ribbiak, the Committee of the Whole receive the Clerk's Department report for September 2018 for information. Questions or comments to the Clerk's report? Are we ready for approving? I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you, Madam Clerk. To you and your staff. Moved by Councilor Lane. The Committee of the Whole receive the Chief Administrative Officer report for September 2018 for information. Anything on this, colleagues? Councilor Ribbiak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. CEO wasn't here, so it's probably not a fair question. I'm just wondering whether there was any further update with regard to land sales since he wrote this. Are you aware of any update that might be available? Since this report was
Yeah,
written?
Ms. Quinlan, can you assist the councilor? Is there any update? I don't know if you took a look at the CAO's report, which talks about active offers, and the town is continuing to work on closing those offers.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, what is the question specifically?
He's just wondering if there's any update that,
On any of the land sale items that the CAO refers to in his report?
Right now, we're dealing with the land sales in camera. We have offers that we have received, and so we're just working on those offers.
okay,
So,
Okay.
yeah.
trying to work through those
Fair enough.
conditions.
So no further update?
That's fair.
Yeah, good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Durley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There seems to be some confusion out in the public regarding the Hay Street sale. We are not touching any of the green space. We're not touching any of the parkland. It's all being preserved. The only thing that is being looked at is that which is covered with building, which the building needs to go. So, rest assured that all the parkland that you're talking about is still going to be preserved. The green space is going to be there, and I see head shaking, but the green space is remaining and probably will be enhanced in the future. So that is something that is clarified, because a few people that I spoke to over the last few days said the whole property is going, and I said, no, it's not. And there are other people saying sell the whole property, but so there's two sides to every story. However, the green space remains. It's not going to be touched.
Thank you. Any others?
No.
Going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. There's our meeting. So it's been moved by Councilor Ribbiak that this regular meeting of committee be adjourned until the next regular meeting scheduled for October 15th, 2018, following council. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Go fight some fires.